The trial began on a cold Monday morning under a sky the color of dull steel. The courthouse steps were lined with reporters, veterans groups, political commentators, and protesters holding signs that alternated between "accountability matters" and "political witch hunt." It was no longer simply a legal proceeding. It had become a referendum, not just on Daniel Whitmore, but on power itself. Inside the federal courtroom, the atmosphere was restrained but electric. The wood-paneled walls, the raised bench, the seal of the United States behind the judge, all of it carried a quiet gravity. Whitmore sat at the defense table beside his attorney, Charles Henley, dressed impeccably as always. His posture was straight. His expression was controlled. He no longer projected defiance, instead, he projected discipline. Michael Rivera sat several rows back with his wife Elena. He had chosen not to sit in the front. He did not want the optics of confrontation. He wanted distance. For months, his name had been spoken in headlines and court filings. Now he simply wanted truth placed on record. Opening statements. The prosecution began with a simple assertion: this case was not about politics, it was about deliberate deception and abuse of public authority. The lead prosecutor spoke calmly, methodically, as she described a pattern of behavior stretching back years. She outlined how the 2017 town hall incident with Thomas Avery followed the same structural response as the 2019 gala confrontation with Rivera. She emphasized the digital evidence, the pre-drafted complaint templates, the internal emails referencing fear narrative, the financial trail to Civic Shield strategies, and most critically, the voice memo instructing staff to emphasize instability. The defense countered by reframing the prosecution's narrative as interpretation layered onto ordinary political risk management. Henley argued that public officials face unpredictable confrontations daily and must prepare for worst-case scenarios. He acknowledged that language used in private emails may appear blunt but insisted that blunt strategy discussions are not criminal conspiracies. Fear, he reminded the jury, is subjective. Drafting templates, he said, is preparation, not proof of malicious activation. The lines were drawn clearly: was this calculated narrative manipulation, or simply defensive political planning misunderstood by hindsight? The evidence unfolds. Over the following days, prosecutors constructed their case with careful sequencing. Digital forensic experts explained metadata analysis in precise, accessible language. They demonstrated how the draft complaint against Rivera had been opened and edited hours before the gala concluded. They showed the timeline of internal Slack messages referencing the Rivera angle. The prosecution then played the hallway footage in full context, followed by the parking garage voice memo. The courtroom fell into a deep silence when Whitmore's recorded voice echoed through the speakers: "Make sure the report emphasizes instability." That's the angle. Henley attempted to dilute its impact during cross-examination by questioning whether the phrase referred to Rivera specifically or to general media framing. The forensic analyst confirmed that the timestamp placed the recording less than 40 minutes after the confrontation. The context was unmistakable. Evan Cole's testimony was more personal. He spoke not as a strategist but as someone who had once believed in Whitmore's vision. Under oath, he described how internal meetings often included discussions about shaping confrontations into leadership moments. He admitted that he initially saw it as normal campaign management. It was only after Rivera's charge escalated and he saw the emotional toll on the veteran's family that he began to question the morality of the system he helped operate. Henley challenged Cole's credibility aggressively, highlighting the immunity agreement and suggesting that he had incentive to shift blame upward. Cole did not raise his voice. He simply repeated that the structure was real and that the 2019 incident mirrored earlier playbooks almost identically. The financial thread. When prosecutors introduced evidence about Civic Shield strategies, the narrative expanded beyond a single confrontation. Forensic accountants detailed structured payments routed through shell entities tied to Whitmore's extended family. The prosecution argued that campaign funds were used not merely for risk assessment but for operationalizing a reputational containment framework. Henley argued that consulting expenditures were lawful and common in modern campaigns. He emphasized that no statute prohibits crisis consulting. The prosecution countered that crisis consulting does not include filing knowingly false police complaints to manufacture a public narrative. The distinction between preparation and deception became the central theme. Rivera testifies. Midway through the trial, Rivera took the stand. His testimony was composed and measured. He described the gala confrontation as it unfolded from his perspective, the insult, the laughter, his response. He made clear that he did not raise his voice or step aggressively toward Whitmore. He explained the shock of seeing edited footage on the news and the humiliation of receiving a police warning on his own porch. When asked about the impact on his family, Rivera paused for several seconds before answering. He described his daughter coming home from school in tears. He described his wife fielding anonymous threats. He did not dramatize. He simply recounted events. On cross-examination, Henley attempted to suggest that Rivera's proximity during the confrontation could reasonably have been perceived as threatening. Rivera responded evenly that disagreement is not aggression and that he had spent years trained in discipline under far more volatile conditions than a charity gala. The jury watched him closely. The broader pattern, perhaps the most consequential testimony, came from a cybersecurity expert who revealed that portions of the encrypted server had been remotely accessed prior to the federal raid from an IP address associated with an external consulting firm holding unrelated federal contracts. While prosecutors did not allege a formal conspiracy beyond Whitmore's circle in this trial, the evidence suggested that narrative containment strategies might not have been unique to one campaign. The judge limited the scope of that thread to avoid prejudicing the jury with speculative implications. Still, the suggestion lingered that Whitmore's methods were part of a broader culture rather than an isolated aberration. Closing arguments. In her closing statement, the prosecutor returned to simplicity. She told the jury that fear can be real, but evidence can reveal whether fear preceded action or followed strategy. She reminded them that the complaint draft began before the gala ended. She replayed the voice memo. She emphasized that public office is a position of trust and that trust is violated when law enforcement processes are weaponized for personal narrative gain. Henley's closing argument was passionate and sharp. He warned the jury about criminalizing political preparation and urged them not to let public outrage influence legal judgment. He argued that imperfect language and aggressive strategy do not equal federal crimes. He asked them to consider whether ambiguity still existed. Then the case went to the jury. The verdict deliberations lasted 3 days. On the fourth morning, the courtroom reconvened. The jury foreperson stood. The room was so quiet that the shuffle of paper sounded amplified. On the count of filing false statements, guilty. On the count of conspiracy to obstruct justice, guilty. On the count of abuse of official authority, guilty. On the count of wire fraud, not guilty. The mixed verdict reflected nuance, but the central accusation held. Whitmore's expression did not visibly change as the verdict was read. He stared forward, jaw set, absorbing the words. His political career ended in that moment, not because of resignation, not because of scandal, but because a jury had placed legal weight behind what began as suspicion. Sentencing would occur months later, but the fall was already complete. Party leadership formally severed ties. Campaign accounts were frozen. Civic shield strategies was permanently dissolved. The aftermath. Michael Rivera did not speak to reporters that day. He walked out of the courthouse holding Elena's hand. Justice, he realized, did not restore what had been taken. It did not erase the fear his family endured. But it affirmed something essential: the truth had been recorded in law, not just in headlines. In the months that followed, congressional committees reviewed procedures regarding public officials filing complaints against private citizens. Ethics reforms were proposed. Civic oversight mechanisms were strengthened. Whether those reforms would endure remained uncertain, but the case had forced scrutiny. Thomas Avery reached out to Rivera privately after the verdict. The two men spoke for nearly an hour. Avery said that hearing the word guilty felt like closure for something he had carried silently for years. It did not undo his losses, but it validated his experience. As for Whitmore, sentencing resulted in a reduced custodial term due to lack of prior record, followed by supervised release. The court's written opinion emphasized deterrence. Public authority must never be leveraged to fabricate criminal narratives for political advantage. The broader ecosystem hinted at during trial remained under quiet federal review. Whether further indictments would come was unknown. But one truth had been established publicly and permanently: the template was real. And once exposed, it could no longer operate invisibly. The story that began with a single insult at a gala ended. Not with outrage, but with accountability. Not perfect accountability. Not complete repair. But enough to draw a line. Power, when challenged by record and persistence, had not proven untouchable. And for Michael Rivera, that was enough.